It's so strange saying that I didn't consider myself an anime fan until just recently, because until just recently, I had no ability to watch or read any anime or manga to my heart's content. As it so happens, all I was extremely limited by time slots, uh, the the networking, the availability of manga in the mid 2000s. It was just difficult for me to get into anime and manga for the longest time, even though I knew from what little I could see, get around to seeing, was one of my favorite things in the world, right? In a way, I've always been a fan of anime. I've been a fan of Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Like, I have always preferred Western manga and anime to I've always preferred anime and manga over Western animation. And today, having now taken the time to read a number of series, kind of piecing together what I like and don't like, going over like, some of the most famous series and like deciding that a lot of them aren't that great and kind of becoming attached to ones that aren't all that talked about. I am enough of an enthusiast now to give you an idea of what my top 10 manga and anime series looks like. Now, this is just an idea. This is just a list, right? It could change at any time. I can't begin to tell you how many times I was looking at this list when I put it together. Well, I'm missing something. Do I really want to put that here? Like, I'm not done with this series. I'm sure this is going to make the top 10 when, like, I finally, get caught up on it or whatever. But this is a 2023 list, right? This is where I'm at right now, and it'll be interesting to see what stays on this list in the future versus like where I'm at now, right? I'm interested in seeing how my tastes and standards develop and whether I like kind of in the future condemn some of these series and kind of talk more about like some other ones that unfortunately just had to be cut for all sorts of reasons. Like there are definitely lots of series out there that I definitely wanted to put on this list, but for now, this is my top 10 anime and manga series of 2023.
Of course, we have to talk about the OGs of OGs, the anime that I watched on Toonami back in the day, the one that really got me invested in anime and shonen battle series, and that was Yu Yu Hakusho, not the iconic and legendary Dragon Ball Z. I was always way more fond of Yu Yu Hakusho. Personally, it's hard for me to really quantify why. I think it was because of the younger characters and like the considerably faster paced plot. Like I would see an episode of Yu Yu Hakusho and it would always be something completely different. They would be like invading a castle or like fighting in a tournament or like fighting just all sorts of crazy demon monsters. It went all over the place all the time. I never even saw the beginning of the series as a kid and had no idea how all this like insanity got kickstarted with Yusuke getting hit by a car and dying. I didn't know about the delinquent angle. I didn't know really that it was supposed to take place in Japan. For me, it was just like this really cool, amazing action show with all this limitless potential. I remember that episode, the first episode I saw when the gang are going through the castle and Kurama fights the rock monster. Like I remember seeing it and thinking it was the coolest thing I had ever seen. And now that I'm older, I can definitely see a lot of Yu Yu Hakusho's problems. Like its blazing fast pacing is excellent for a kid who doesn't have the time or the ability to watch a lot of shows, but it also makes you feel as if there are a lot of wasted plot potential, right? Like a lot of characters don't get interesting resolutions. A lot of characters are just dropped or forgotten about. Plot points are never brought up again, and there are the occasional really terrible justifications for the conclusion of an arc, right? Like there are a lot of times where Yusuke just pulls some ridiculous transformation out of nowhere and just wins the fight, right? And it's embarrassing. There are definitely a lot of problems with Yu Yu Hakusho, but looking back on it, the show does a lot more good than it does bad, right? Like at the end of the day, I'm still like very much attached to the show in spite of all of its problems. Number 9 is, of course, Dragon Ball Z. Although I didn't grow up with Dragon Ball, I was always very intrigued by the show and its characters. I saw them as iconic. I would always see them parodied. They were, iconic for anime at the time and still are to a certain extent. I liked what I watched of Dragon Ball growing up, but I was never able to stick with it enough to really get a handle on who the characters are or what was going on or what the stakes were. It's really easy for someone growing up in the 90s or 2000s to just watch completely different sagas from Dragon Ball back to back, and with the fact that like Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z were running alongside each other in America, it got even more confusing. Like as a kid, I actually did prefer Dragon Ball, even though I understood that it was a prequel series, and it was well worth watching. I always wanted to watch a Dragon Ball instead of Dragon Ball Z growing up, but it wasn't always on, so I wasn't able to like piece together everything. It was difficult, right? It was already a huge show at the time. It had already concluded. It had like over 100 episodes. It's kind of hard to get into. But when you actually do get to sit down and watch it and from beginning to end and really start to appreciate the artistry, the amazing animation, the creativity, the amazing characters, you have one of the defining examples of shonen action battle manga, right? To the point where like I almost feel kind of bad for like shoving this on the list because in a way like I think this series kind of transcends a top 10 list. Like I probably could have just put another series on here and then put like an aside saying, oh yeah, I love Dragon Ball too, but I want to like everybody loves Dragon Ball. It seems too basic in a lot of ways, which is probably why it's so low on the list. But I still really love and appreciate Dragon Ball for what it is. It is like, despite its popularity, like it is like a legendary franchise for a reason, right? Like I would be remiss to not talk about how amazing this series is and how it still holds up to this day. It's far better than I would say at least two of the big three, Naruto and Bleach, and I think it's superior to basically all of those successor series. My Hero Academia, Jujutsu Kaisen, all of that stuff. Like in a lot of ways, I don't think Dragon Ball Z will ever be topped. Even the sequel series, Super, isn't really living up to the expectations. There are so many things you can talk about when it comes to this series, but when all is said and done, you just have an iconic masterpiece that will always be talked about, always be loved, and will continue to gain new fans for decades to come. At number 8, we have the illustrious Dr. Stone, with gorgeous artwork and a unique sci-fi setting where all of humanity has been destroyed. The protagonist Senku must use his knowledge of science to rebuild society, rediscover technology, and help develop the world back into its previously civilized state. The series sticks out to me due to its unique premise and just sheer creativity in the sense where it's not really a battle manga or a traditional shonen. It really does have this really cool sci-fi bent where the series is really fixated on real world logic and real world science and real world scientific solutions to real world problems that human societies have had to overcome for millions of years. And it does such a great job kind of presenting this in a way where you can follow along with it and learn a lot. And it's not quite like, I would not quite call it like edutainment or anything like that. It really is just kind of like this goofy sci-fi show with this focus on the science, right? Like, I'm not sure how accurate a lot of the scientific concepts are. Like, from what little I've looked into, it seems to be pretty accurate. But, when it comes to these kind of things, you should always be skeptical. Like, I really, really love Dr. Stone from a premise standpoint, but a lot of like the plot points and the executions and like the fact that the series is unwilling to like challenge the notion that science is anything but like the greatest thing ever, right? Like the series team seems a little bit too in love with the whole like science angle in a way. There are I've talked a little bit about my problems with the plotting of Dr. Stone in the past, about like the whole thing about Ishigami Village and his dad, and like the whole there are like real problems with the plot and like some real leaps of logic sometimes, which kind of leads me to put this series a lot lower on this list than I would have when I first discovered it, but there's no denying that I still really love the series. I've read the manga several times. I'm watching the anime again. It really does live up to, while it was still running, it was my favorite Shonen Jump series, and I still have a very strong attachment to it. At number 7, we have Berserk, a title that would probably top most people's lists. I am very underwhelmed by Berserk in a lot of ways. This was hyped up as being like the greatest series ever to me, right? This was something that a lot of people told me was the greatest thing ever, that it was really innovative, that it had gorgeous artwork, great action, it was dark, it was engaging. Like it was like the greatest thing ever, right? And then read it, and I thought it was just okay, right? Like I was not really drawn into Berserk all that much, right? Until just recently, I wasn't even sure if I was a big fan of it. But upon reading like the Falcon of the Millennium Empire arc, I started to get invested in like the whole Guts versus Griffith thing and how Guts has developed as a person over the years. Like after the dreadful Conviction arc, which really is terrible, the series really found its footing and really made it stick out in my mind as just this really well crafted dark fantasy story with this really truly larger than life protagonist that just kind of supersedes everything about it. It is a phenomenal series. And for me personally, I do tend to think that like Berserk is great for like individual moments and panels and like things that happen, as opposed to like the overarching plot, which I think is kind of weak, because I do think certain aspects of it are forced. I think it took way too long for the plot to get going. I think there are definitely lots of things that can be cut out and don't really mean a whole lot. Like I said, the whole tower, like the conviction thing, is just garbage. Like there I was definitely very unimpressed with Berserk for a long time. But like at the end of the day, I still find myself like very heavily influenced by it. I like how dark it is. I like how violent it is. I like the action and like the individual panel work, and I like certain individual moments. There is this feeling though that, and I can't understate this enough, is that this is an extremely overhyped series. Like a lot of people like say this is the best ever, but for me it's just kind of okay, right? It's just kind of mid, and it still makes a top 10 list because, like I said, I really, really love individual moments and chapters and like themes of Berserk. But as an overarching experience, it just feels like it took too long, right? It feels like it feels like it was never ever going to like reach a satisfying conclusion, to the point where now it seems like we're not going to get one. So that's very disappointing to fans, very disappointing to people who like spent their entire lives following this stuff. And for me, like, because simply not having an ending, not being well paced, like not having a real payoff, like being too reliant on like individual moments, just kind of really hampers this one. But at the end of the day, I still really love and appreciate it for what it is. I hate to be that guy, but I loved One Piece before it was cool. I was watching this stuff when it aired on 4Kids, okay? Like, I remember that original dub and thinking it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Like, One Piece is the first anime series, I think, that I was able to follow along from like a reasonably early point, Syrup Village, and was able to like stick with it up all the way up until like the end of Alabasta, right? Like watching this, for that length of time, getting invested in the plot, the characters, the world, like it established itself as one of my favorite things ever. And then they had to redub the entire thing. It left the network I was watching it on. And then I had to spend years, like legit like 15, 16 years, trying to find a format that I could stick with, that I could watch. I couldn't watch Crunchyroll because I couldn't watch the anime version because it was too long. I tried reading on like the Shonen Jump app, but it was like the screen was too small, so I ended up getting volumes on Kindle, and that took forever. And now I'm officially like basically caught up with One Piece. I'm at the end of Wano. I'll have the next time I really get invested in reading it, I'll have caught up with it. But like yeah, like I love One Piece, always have, and in a lot of ways, a lot of the best material is stuff that was published after I stopped reading. Of course, like Ennis Lobby, well. Skypiea was garbage. Like, it took me forever to get past Skypiea. I kept getting filtered by Skypiea for the longest time. But, like, after that, you get, like, Enies Lobby, which is peak One Piece. You get Thriller Bark, which is amazing, a personal favorite of mine, even though the fan base seems to not like it. You get all this crazy stuff. The only bad arc after post time skip is Fishman Island, right? Everything else is just peak. There's so much crazy content, right? Like just seeing how good Dressrosa, Whole Cake, and Wano are, like these could be like entire manga series in their own right, right? Like if Oda actually decided to go that route, right? But instead it's one cohesive story that's just been going on for 25 years to the point where like I legit don't even know if any manga series is ever gonna top what One Piece has accomplished. Like I legit don't think it's possible. Like the series has simply just raised the bar so high when it comes to like just having such consistent storytelling over such a long period of time. I don't know if it's like doable, but like I love One Piece. Great action, creative fight scenes, amazing characters. It's bogged down by one thing though, and that is how long it is. Like I know I just got done like praising the length, but like it really is kind of a buzzkill getting into the series for the first time. It is really difficult, like getting introduced to all these characters, all these weird concepts, all these islands that don't really mean anything, and then like having them just be discarded for like the next arc. It's really hard to get into in a lot of ways, and I can totally see why the series has took such a long time to become popular in the West because of its length, because of like its weirdness, because of like everything about it. Like I totally remember what it was like trying to get people into this as a kid. And nobody knew what it was. Nobody wanted to know what it was. And now it's like the biggest thing in the world. It's bigger than Batman. And it's so gratifying. I feel so vindicated by seeing this become popular. Like it's like I'm so happy to see One Piece continuing to do well and continuing like delivering. And they still haven't found One Piece, right? We're in the final saga now, and if they really nail the final saga, the ending, this is probably going to go down as one of the all-time great manga series, right? I That hasn't happened yet, but I do think if the series goes out on a high note, this is going to be like one of the all-time best. Well, it's only fitting in that in 2023, the year that Spy Family eclipsed One Piece in popularity, that I would also put it higher than One Piece on my top 10 list, even though it hasn't been running that long. There aren't that many volumes in comparison, and in a lot of ways, it's only just now finding its footing. But if you actually read Spy Family, if you actually like read ahead and like get a feel for what they're trying to do with these characters, with the themes, with the setting, you really start to appreciate just what makes it so great in a lot of ways. And I loved Spy Family from the onset, right? I was like addicted to this series the instant I decided to check it out on Kindle, right? I bought it on a whim. I wanted something a little bit different. I bought this series that looked cool, that looked interesting, and I was like immediately charmed by the characters, by the world, by the setting, by the unique premise, and I was drawn in. And although there was like that early concern of like, okay, this plot doesn't take itself too seriously, it doesn't seem like it's going to be the next One Piece. It seems like it's more focused on like family drama and just the slice of life stuff instead of having a real plot. The series does an excellent job balancing like character development and realizations, and with the plot stuff, right? With ordinary everyday slice of life stuff, and it's kind of difficult to explain to people. I suppose in a lot of ways, Spy Family is way more popular among general audiences than it is among hardcore anime fans, because I think a lot of anime fans really have this mindset that like things need to be edgy and hardcore and have like high stakes all the time, while like Spy Family doesn't really have that usually, right? Like a lot of people are put off by like what Spy Family like puts its focus on. Kids getting in trouble at school, or like having these weird, like having like these meaningful moments with like the people around them, and things like that. Like it's off-putting to a lot of people who are looking for like more of the spy stuff, right? But I think Spy Family, more than any other series I've ever read, like really makes that stuff work, and really makes it engaging, and really makes you care about the characters and what's going on. like reading the manga, you really get this sense that like a lot of the side characters are actually way more developed than you would actually expect. The anime hasn't caught up to this point yet, but you get like a surprising amount of situations involving random side characters. There's a situation in which Anya is in danger and like neither of her parents are involved. Right, the people who are involved are like characters you've seen at like related to the school and the people associated with them. Right, like you get this really cool sense of them like dealing with this situation and like handling it themselves, and it does a lot of like cool world building, and it does a lot for the characters, and like your the parents aren't there. Like it's entirely driven by Anya and like the characters she has interacted with over the past like 50 or so chapters, and it is surprising just how this turn of events plays out. Right, it's remarkable. It's really impressive, and of course you get like the good slice of life stuff with like fun, engaging, interesting characters that like I think would be really easy to write off as stereotypical in a lot of ways, but do showcase a lot of depth. And again, like this isn't obvious if you're not a manga reader, right? But the series does have it's endlessly entertaining. It has a lot of depth. It is just a remarkable ride, and I am like really invested in it so far. I just loved this so much, and I hope that it continues being popular and successful for years to come. If Yu Hakusho was my introduction to anime, then Uzumaki was my introduction to manga. Uzumaki is the series that really got me invested in the concept of Japanese horror. It is a masterfully done, interesting take on cosmic horror in which like this spiral curse plagues a town. It seems so goofy. In a lot of ways it is, but with stunning artwork, with unique storylines, and really surprisingly relatable, engaging characters, Uzumaki like charmed me from start to finish. I really could not put it down. It was like a really addicting read, and there are definitely a lot of problems with it, right? Like Junji Ito tends to have this problem to go where he goes overboard, and it gets a little bit too ridiculous. But in general, like generally speaking, Uzumaki is a masterpiece in the horror genre. It really sticks out in my mind as just this like amazing read. It's not always scary, right? But it is fun, all right? Like, and that's what I'm looking for in manga is just like having a good time, and nothing really does it quite the way that Uzumaki does. I've never been able to read the manga for Hajime no Ippo because for some reason it's not available in America. But I have seen all three seasons of the anime, and all of them, especially the first, are some of the most entertaining combat anime I've ever seen. And it's a show about boxing, right? Young fisherman Hajime Ippo Makanauchi gets into a scuffle with bullies and ends up falling in with this boxing club, and you follow him on his journey as he becomes the featherweight champion of Japan and tries to go for a world title. It is so simple that it's a show about boxing, but it's so well executed with its real world, training regimens and focus on the characters and like focusing on like the goals and like the relationship with people around them, and like it really captures that feel of being part of like a sports club, right? It really feels like a bunch of bros just hanging out and having fun. And it really does feel in a lot of ways like a real thing that actual people go through, right? There are instances where he doesn't win, right? There are instances where he's like struggling, where he's has to overcome some issue he has, whether it's with his health or whether it's with like people around him or like the guy he's going up against or what someone else is going through, right? Like the show does an amazing job building up an insane cast of characters to the point where later on Ippo is simply one character in like this giant ensemble cast that's all like battling for their own like titles and their own situationships. Like characters have been retired because they've been punched in the head so much. Like it's incredible. It's incredible to see what they've done here. Like, I'm not an expert on sports films or like sports series or anything. This is really the only one I've ever really gotten into. But like, from my experience, like, I think it's safe to say that like Ippo might be the best sports story ever told, right? Like, it just feels incredible to see how invested you get in this like fictional Japanese boxer and like his everyday life and like how he handles like going into like each upcoming fight. Like, I have never been more hyped for fights than I have been for Hajime no Ippo, and it's not even like a serious fighting show. It's a sport. Like, you get so invested, you get so into it, and all the characters are so well rounded that you end up really supporting the opponent a lot of the times too. Like, a lot of them are interesting, have their own unique training regimens and the people they're around and like their relationship with Ippo and how they tackle it. Like, it's kind of crazy thinking like how subversive the show can be sometimes. Like, I'm thinking specifically of my one of my favorite fights, Sendo versus, is his name Sekigahara? Right, it's the one right before like Lollapalooza, where like the guy is being built up as like the next major character that Ippo has to beat because he's already beaten Sendo already, right? But like what actually happens is that Sendo just comes in there and just wrecks him, right? Like, he just manages to come through and just like beat this guy. And so instead of like, Ippo fighting this guy he's never fought before, he's like doing a rematch with like one of his best rivals, right? That is an amazing moment, right? That was so unbelievably good. And I feel as if the show just is full of moments like that. I've never heard anyone else single that moment out in particular as being great, but it's not because people are like failing to notice it or whatever. Like, this show is filled with just amazing moments like this. It's crazy how I'm watching the show again now, like casually, and like, I'm surprised at how invested I get into this. Like, the jokes, the humor, like the characters and like the fights. Like, even now I get hyped watching this stuff. It is amazing. It really is masterfully done, and I wish this series would take off more in America. It wouldn't be a top 10 Cody Lee list if it didn't have One Punch Man on it. Like, I would, this is the series that got me back into anime after like quite a bit of a long hiatus. Like, this series, seeing it on like clips of it on YouTube, seeing the premise, seeing the animation, it really made me realize just how popular anime had become and just how like insane some of the shows that were coming out were. And even now, watching One Punch Man season 1 or 2, or like reading the manga, I actually just got caught up on the manga just the other night. Like, reading the series, like, it's more than just a great anime. It's more than just a great show, like just a great like manga series. Like, this might be one of the best superhero stories ever told, right? This is an amazing series featuring like these insanely overpowered characters, like just getting into these crazy situations with these monsters. Like, it's not about the drama between like superheroes or like, oh, should we register superheroes or should we let them do what they want? Like, is vigilanteism wrong? Should we throw Joker into Arkham Asylum so he can just break out again? No, what happens instead is that like One Punch Man shows up and he just like kills the villains, right? The heroes, like, the monsters are treated as like objective evils that like need to be purged for the good of society. And like, it is insanely based. It's so good, right? Like, it's so satisfying like every single time seeing these monsters just go down and being dealt with. And honestly, like in situations when monsters don't die, right? They often come back and become like reoccurring characters and actually have like interesting roles in the plot, right? There's this scene in like season 2, like in the Monster Association arc, right, where a gorilla monster is like rampaging around the streets, like, oh, I'm gonna keep attacking people until you raise my rank to threat level demon, right? Like, he's going around causing problems, and then what happens? He encounters another gorilla, the gorilla from the first season, who just like one shots him and then walks away. Like, it's funny, it's unexpected, but it also gets like surprising it's a surprising reappearance of this character that like I think most viewers would have completely forgotten about, right? It's crazy how much One Punch Man really respects its continuity and like the intelligence of the readers, because all of these characters have like insanely convoluted like relationships with each other, with the plots, with like some of the monsters even. Like I just read a chapter of the manga where it turns out like the boss of the monster organization, Psychos, the one that looks like Lucille Langley from my books, Eye of the Dragon and Jaw of the Dragon. Uh, the one that looks like Lucille Langley, like, yeah, she has a history with like the Psychic Sisters, and it's not obvious, right? It's not obvious, like, that like Blizzard knows her and that they spent like their high school years together trying to like train their psychic powers to be as strong as Tornado. Like, but it's like apparent if you actually like think back to how Psychos was just handling the whole Tornado situation in general. It's so interesting. It's so well put together. Like it makes sense. It really makes you just invested in like everything that's happening. Like in a lot of ways, the series just kind of goes above and beyond when it comes to like these portrayal of characters and what they're capable of, and what it means for the state of the world, right? Because in a lot of ways, even though the villains keep getting defeated, like things are getting worse. They are building up to some crazy epidemic of god threat level proportions, and I just can't wait to see what happens next. It is going to be amazing when we finally see this. When we finally see the series reach its conclusion, I think, like after seeing like what happens at the end of like the Monster Association arc, like this is, I think, kind of establishing itself as a really special superhero story in a lot of ways. I think it goes beyond what like Superman or like any other like second-rate superhero would ever be capable of, and not just by like One Punch Man isn't great just because he's stronger than other heroes, right? Like I do think this is something that people don't really pick up on, is that like his real strength is like his ability to like kind of inspire those around him to just rise up to like incredible situations in a lot of ways, but he's always there when he's needed. It's interesting. There it definitely needs to be. One Punch Man is so unique and so distinct from other series that like, especially superhero fiction, where it's really different. It's really difficult to tell where the story is going to go from here. Like where I'm at now, like okay, what is Blast motivations? Like what is uh like what's going on with him, what's going on with Tornado, what's going on with like what's going to happen with the Hero Association and these new guys that are popping up, and like all the fallout from like the Monster Association stuff. Like what's happening with all of that? Like it can go in all kinds of other situations. Like when you compare it to something like generic and uninspired, right? When you compare it to like Invincible or The Boys, right? Like both of those series are trite. They're not really going anywhere. They have like very basic premises, like, oh, what if superheroes were evil, right? One Punch Man is able to do more with that, with like its ridiculous concept. It is just incredible to kind of see like these characters develop, like have their incredible fights, have their like incredible moments, right? Have like their insane character development, and have it like keep escalating like way past what you would ever see. Like One Punch Man, the volumes, it's not that long, right? It's like 26 volumes long. Like you don't get a lot of. I don't think I've ever seen a manga series that has so many characters give so much development to so many different characters at once and keep it like all satisfying. You have the bit with like Child Emperor and like going up against like Drive Knight and Metal Knight and like trying to like go up against like the Hero Association, who he's beginning to feel is corrupt. You have like characters like Flashy Flash, who has like some relationship with the Ninja Village. Like you have like you have him like hanging out with Saitama for a large portion of the Monster Association arc. You have characters that are just like have these really amazing just moments in general, right? That are building up to something. It's just phenomenal. It's so amazing, right? And I really don't think that like anything like it really comes close. Like I do think in a lot of ways like the storyboarding and just the general plot and character development is honestly like a genre high point. Like I can't think of anything that makes as interesting or cool looking characters as One Punch Man. And we are going to be seeing. I'm curious like how the story is going to develop from here, what we're going to see. I am very anxious to see just how things develop going forward. Attack on Titan is my favorite anime series of all time. Anybody who knows me probably saw this coming. You know, I love everything about it, from the music to the action to the premise to the characters. Like, Attack on Titan really stands high above the rest of the industry simply by tackling extremely strong topics that I think no other series has even come close to matching. All right, this series is dark. It is brooding. It has like some of the craziest moments I've ever seen in any show ever. Right? It is amazing. And of course, I keep mentioning the show because I watched the season one. Right? Of course, like everyone knows season one. Everybody knows that. Like I've read the manga, so I know how it ends. I know everything about it. And yeah, I am. You know, Aaron Yeager did nothing wrong. I am over the moon about the series as a whole, right? Like, I think this series is a masterpiece that is, I think, very greatly misunderstood from like the sort of people who browse anime message boards and still complain about like the plot on Reddit. Like, I suppose it's the nature of anything that's super popular like this to kind of come up with like some contrived like fan fiction theory and then like convince yourself that's better than like what they actually came up with. But like, you know, this isn't Game of Thrones, okay? Like the way the ending was received is not going to kill the series credibility long term. It's still extremely popular, still beloved, and is still getting new fans to this day. Like, Attack on Titan is just like remarkable. And I I really look to it as like kind of a benchmark as to like how much the industry has grown over the years, especially like in America, how much like something like this could just explode and just become this huge deal. Like it really does feel like a show that would not have been produced by Americans, right? For a wide range of reasons. But like what it comes down to is that like Attack on Titan's the themes, like the topics it covers, like this is stuff that really needs to be talked about more, right? This is like the reality of the world we live in, right? This is important. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that. In a lot of ways, like I kind of see like Attack on Titan as like the defining cultural milestone achievement of like the new tens in entertainment, right? Like this is just a series that just really broke the mold in a lot of ways, and I just wish more people would appreciate it. Like I just wish that like it feels like right now that we're still in that phase where people are still trying to like say the show isn't good, or that like, oh, they turn into Titans, that's ridiculous. Like without really understanding like what the show is actually about, or like what they're trying to accomplish, and like, you know, how things develop in a lot of ways. Like it's crazy to me that there are people who will argue that the series wasn't initially planned to have like an outside setting, right? That like they liked it better when like the illusion that the outside world did not exist was was like better than what they actually came up with, right? But like I think a lot of people just can't appreciate things like this. Like that's the problem, is that like Attack on Titan feels in a lot of ways that it's too high IQ for its audience. In a lot of ways. Like I feel like a lot of people don't want to accept what Attack on Titan is saying and are still trying to like come to terms with it in a lot of ways. But I I love the series. I think this is amazing. I hope that like with time, as time passes, that it starts getting the credit that it deserves, and that this is my personal anime series of all time. It is by far my favorite, and I just cannot wait to see just what the genre has in store for us in the future. I'm sure like eventually, you know, we're definitely going to get more One Punch Man. Like I'm sure we're definitely going to get like more shows like this going forward, and I cannot wait to see what they come up with next.